There's a lot of emerging launch providers coming out right now, as most of you know. However, precious few of them have actually reached orbit, and one of these, Astra Space, is preparing for its first launch from Cape Canaveral, carrying up NASA satellites. This, on the surface of it, would appear to be a very impressive thing, especially for a company that was started relatively recently, does not have a tremendous amount of funding, although still north of $1 billion, which is substantial, and also has a very unusual business model. No reusability, a tiny amount of payload, but the idea or the objective of launching rockets at least once a week and eventually every day. Nobody is trying for anything resembling that except perhaps for SpaceX and Starship. So it should come as a surprise to nobody that Astra Space has been receiving a lot of positive press, at least as far as space journalism is concerned. There are very few companies that are looking for this kind of ambitious objective, and Astra Space, at least on the surface of it, has a pretty good business plan. The whole idea of being able to quickly and rapidly deploy small sats, or perhaps just a single small sat, where you need it at the time that you need it. Hence, they've received a great deal of interest from the US military and the US Space Force, with the promise of delivering military small sats in the event that a critical part of a constellation, that is, should go out of service or get knocked down by an anti-sat weapon. All very impressive and therefore receiving a great deal of positive press. However, there is an undercurrent of negative information about this company that is giving me a little bit of pause when we're talking about the long-term viability of this company and whether or not their investors are putting their money in the right place. Late last month, during the holidays, Astra Space became the target of a harsh critique by a New York-based financial firm called Kerrisdale Capital, and they said, quote, that Astra has no revenue, no track record of reliability, and no established market for its undersized vehicle, unquote. And they're not the only ones who are concerned about this company, so I decided to have a close look at this critique, examine the details, and determine whether or not Astra has a realistic chance of competing with SpaceX, Rocket Lab, Virgin Orbit, and a number of other emerging competitors in this increasingly shrinking market. And I'll tell you, the conclusions I came to, and it wasn't just me that came to these conclusions, are a little bit disturbing. My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well, so it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry. Now, without a doubt, Astra Space has accomplished some pretty impressive things in the few years that it's been in operation. Granted, it has $2 billion worth of funding, which may be a hell of a lot less than Blue Origin, but 10 times as much money as a lot of the European companies that I talked about in my last video. So really, one shouldn't be terribly surprised that they've been able to accomplish some impressive things given their funding compared to some of their competitors. That having been said, the payload capabilities that are described on their website is a little bit concerning as well, because frankly, it just isn't true. They claim that they're capable of sending up to 600 kilograms, actually 630 kilograms, up to low Earth orbit. However, their current rocket, the Rocket 3.0 as it is called, and they have a 3.1, 3.2, nevertheless, their current capabilities are only 150 kilograms to low Earth orbit and substantially less than that to other orbits. So I'm really not sure why they're advertising that kind of payload capabilities unless they have something in the works that's going to be coming out very soon that's capable of that. All of that having been said, though, let's just take them at their word that they are going to be able to deliver those kinds of payloads soon. The critique from Kerrisdale Capital, entitled Astra Space Incorporated Headed to Disaster, which is not a very encouraging title, has a lot of negative things to say about this company's business plan and their technology. Quote, Astra is poorly positioned within an overcrowded market for small launch vehicles. Its main competitors will soon be launching larger 1,000 kilogram plus payload rockets, while Astra has yet to overcome developmental hurdles necessary to successfully launch even a single satellite into any of the emerging broadband mega constellations. Now, of course, Astra has reached orbit at this point, so some of that is not entirely valid, but still, there is a lot of things in this report that concern me quite a bit. For example, quote, the company increased its payload capacity goal, not a trivial matter in rocket programs, and signed a secret deal with a competitor for access to some of the competitor's more powerful engine IP. Both clear signs that Astra is struggling to keep pace with market leaders, unquote. Now, that may also indicate why Astra is advertising such a large payload capability while their current version of the Rocket 3.0 is not capable of carrying anywhere near that payload. Hard to say because Astra is incredibly secretive about their operations and doesn't grant much in the way of interviews. The report goes on to say, quote, Astra's investor pitch boils down to selling the pipe dream, yes, they use the word pipe dream first, not me, of an unprecedented number of cheap rocket launches. Astra's forecast calls for 300 launches per year by 2025, a whopping 10 times more than SpaceX achieved in 2021. And the news doesn't get any better. Quote, management markets this exceptionally aspirational goal, which we view as pure fantasy, in a bid to spread its expensive Bay Area manufacturing costs over enough rockets in order to turn a profit. A reality check is in order, and this is all underlined. To date, Astra has managed just one successful orbital flight test. If Astra's 5-year projection of almost daily successful launches of rockets made with non-aerospace grade parts does not sound improbable enough, it ignores an even graver problem with Astra's projection. Not one expert whom we interviewed, nor any independent market study we reviewed, offered any reason to think that, industry-wide, sufficient market demand will exist for Astra to sustain approximately daily launches by 2035, let alone 2025. And here's the main problem. Since Astra's current rockets only have a 150 kilogram payload, they need lots and lots of launches in order to remain competitive. And really, their competitors are looking even more promising than they're looking for the next couple of years. The report brings out that Rocket Lab, Relativity, ABL, Firefly, plus a lot of the European companies that I've mentioned in my videos have plans to produce a 1,000 kilogram rocket within the next couple of years, whereas Astra is aspiring to produce a 500 kilogram rocket 2 years from now, which explains their payload claims on their website. Although Astra simply says that we send payloads of up to 500 kilograms to up to 500 kilometers mid-inclination orbits, with more destinations coming soon. Not that a 500 kilogram payload is coming in the next couple of years, but that they have that capability now. Nevertheless, I'm not going to throw any false advertising claims at these guys or anything like that, or suggest that there's anything dirty going on here, because I have no proof of that. And there are many other emerging launch providers that claim to send these kinds of payloads up to LEO as well, even though they don't have a rocket capable of doing it yet. So we can skip over that. The whole point is their current plans, their business plan for the next couple of years, and just how competitive they're going to be. And none of these things look very promising in spite of the $2 billion that's been invested in this company. And of course, there are some very fundamental problems with this business plan just from looking on the surface of it. I mean, in order to deploy a constellation of small sats with only 150 kilograms worth of payload, you would need to send up a lot of rockets. And the other objective, that is to swiftly deploy a replacement satellite into a constellation that either went out of service or got knocked down by an anti-sat weapon, this is a very difficult thing to accomplish with a vertical launch provider as opposed to a horizontal launch provider like Virgin Orbit. And here's why. Vertical launch providers have lots of restrictions when we're talking about weather, when we're talking about people straying into their field of operation during a launch window. Lots of different things that can cause a mission to scrub, and Falcon 9s scrub all the time, which means that if you need to quickly and reliably launch a replacement satellite, say within 24 hours, a vertical launch provider is really not what you want to use. Instead, what you want to use is a horizontal launch provider, something like Cosmic Girl or Strato Launch, that can fly to where you have a clear launch window, a clear field of fire, if you will, into an established launch window without having to worry about people straying into it, avoiding bad weather, that sort of thing. And this is precisely what Virgin Orbit is doing. As a matter of fact, they demonstrated that with their third successful launch into orbit. So if Virgin Orbit proves that they are more capable of rapidly responding to emergency situations in LEO, then what happens to companies like Astra? And as you may have noticed with my last video that I made about European small sat launchers, I generally compare Rocket Lab to any emerging small sat launch provider when I'm determining just how viable they are and how competitive they are. The Electron stands 18 meters tall as opposed to 11.6 for the Astra. It has double the payload at least to low Earth orbit. On top of that, it's made out of far superior components. Rocket Lab prides itself on its in-house developed rockets and 3D printing processes, whereas Astra appears to be on the opposite end of the scale, and this is again according to Kerrisdale Capital, quote, by using manufacturing processes which allow the production of hundreds of rockets per year, some of which Astra anticipates will explode or otherwise fail to perform as intended, and relying on commercial off-the-shelf components, Astra's business model is to drive economies of scale, lower production costs, and target customers at the lower end of the small sat market who are theoretically willing to accept lower reliability for a lower price. And as far as reusability is concerned, well, you may as well forget it. Instead of launching one great big expendable rocket like the SLS, Astra wants to launch lots and lots of little expendable rockets. And I really don't see a business plan where this becomes any more viable just because it's a smaller rocket using cheaper components. And this is borne out by the way that Astra went public. Again, this is according to the report. Quote, Astra went public without citing a single launch market study in its investor deck or in the launch market section of its S1 filing. It's a significant red flag with a simple explanation. Every legitimate market study that Astra could include would only show its projections to be last laughably unrealistic, so Astra just left them out, unquote. And to back up these assertions, Kerrisdale interviewed a number of engineers and managers in the industry, all of whom work in the small launch environment, and all of them had negative things to say. Quote, "I laugh at that number. There's no way they're doing 300 launches by 2025. By 2035, it would still be a stretch. By the way, all of these people chose not to be identified, probably for risk of being subjected to lawsuits. And who knows what's going to happen to me for releasing this, but let's just keep going." Quote, "We are all around in the industry in the same spot. Even within Astra and at our small launch company, I'm looking at 1/10 of Astra's number of rockets, and we are freaking out. Are we really going to have enough customers for this?" Unquote. And then finally, a mission manager for a broadband mega constellation said, quote, "Happy they got to orbit on last launch a few weeks ago. That's great, but there's just a lot of issues with their rocket and their business model. Claims of launching every day? It's pretty exciting when a launch provider can launch once a month. And sure, everyone would love for rockets to be like airplanes, but that's not going to happen for at least another decade. So yes, I have some serious concerns about Astra's claims," unquote. And finally, the report goes in for the kill by simply laying out the numbers and the costs. Quote, "Based on Astra's third quarter 2021 overhead and research and development costs of $39 million or $158 million annualized, and assuming 10 launches a year, Astra's allocated fixed cost per launch would be roughly $16 million. Add in $2 million for materials, and Astra's total cost per rocket would be $18 million. Astra's disclosed ASP, or how much money they're making off of these launches, is $3.75 million, meaning if launching just shy of a monthly cadence, Astra would lose a little over $14 million in EBITDA per rocket. That is just very bad news, and the only way to make it better is to launch a lot more rockets, only with over 100 launches, well above our estimate of the entire addressable market in 2024 and 2025, and generously holding price constant at $3.75 million per launch, and giving the company credit for lowering material costs down to $1 million, does Astra begin to break even on a per rocket basis. 100 launches per year, significantly more than SpaceX does right now, and all they're managing to do is break even. But as I mentioned in my last video about Astra, the main problem that I have with this company is their general philosophy and their lack of innovation. This is a company that may be able to put things into orbit for a very low price and also to establish a tremendously high launch cadence, but to what end? Just to send tons and tons of expendable rockets up into low Earth orbit, just to continue deploying one small sat after another into an already crowded space? I would like Astra a lot more if they had a particular focus on cleaning up low Earth orbit by establishing partnerships with companies like Astroscale to remove as much space junk as possible rather than putting more of it up. I would also like them to at least try to embrace reusability and explore the possibility of retrieving their first stage, the only real stage of this rocket actually, perhaps through a parafoil system or something along those lines. But they're not trying to do it. Instead, they're simply trying to send rockets up as cheaply as possible to deploy as many small sats into LEO as they possibly can in a short amount of time. Now granted, that's what other launch providers are trying to do as well, but they're combining it with a lot more innovation, a lot more reusability, a lot more unique technologies. Astra is doing none of these things, and as a result, it's not the type of launch provider that I tend to support, and also it's not the type of launch provider that I think a lot of companies are going to go for while they're trying to deploy their satellite constellations. Instead, they're going to go with providers that have a more reliable history of success. Rocket Lab was having some problems with their reliability, and Astra is looking at perhaps an 80% success margin. Who really is going to risk their valuable technology going up on something like that? Only somebody who has nothing to lose. And I really wouldn't want to build a business plan on trying to attract customers that have nothing to lose. So please subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more critical commentary like this, and also keep in mind that I do not believe 100% that Astra is doomed to failure, only that all of this evidence doesn't look very good on paper, but who knows? They got to orbit, so they might be able to succeed with their business plan no matter how ambitious it might be or unlikely to succeed. We'll just have to see how things turn out in the future, and I'm certainly not giving any advice in what you should be investing in right now. That is up to you. So until we see what the results are and see whether or not Astra's radical business plan is something that might succeed in today's market, as unlikely as that may be, I certainly would like to see them succeed, because with every emerging launch provider that fails, it makes the whole industry look shaky and not a good thing to invest in, which is something that nobody wants. So I certainly wish them the best. So until they come through one way or the other, and we see whether or not launching a rocket every day is the best way to build a rocket company, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.